Warhammer 40k Space Marine. This is a first impression based off the PlayStation and Windows versions of the demo that I played. There are two sections to play here, the Inquisitor and Battlements. The Inquisitor is a quite long section where you and your Space Marine brethren do battle against the green tide of Orks, whereas Battlements is quite short and has your character wearing a jump pack and you doing slam attacks into the ground at high speed. The funny thing is that Battlements is more like the demo I was expecting in terms of length, with lots of demos being vanishingly short. The Inquisitor has the sort of meat needed in demos, and the fact that this particular demo includes both is quite convincing, since it speaks of a confidence in the game from whoever devised the demo. In fact, the game meets everything applicable in my own developer checklist of stuff that should be in games, except possibly the difficulty levels, whilst from their descriptions they appear to be the usual easy, medium, hard, and relating those to the average player, in normal I died a lot more than what I'd consider occasionally. It seems the game at some level recognises this fact, putting you on easy difficulty by default, which in practice leaves the game without an actual difficulty setting that's easy. However, compared to other recent games with the difficulty bloat problem, Space Marine is comparatively mild. Oh, they did use a help screen that depends on how long it takes the game to load. I generally look on this as a bad thing, since hard drive speeds vary from console to console if the user has installed their own, but Space Marine lets you access all of that same information from the pause menu, so it isn't a problem. A small explanation of the peculiar health system of Space Marine would have made the experience a little more rounded too. In most games you don't heal by doing a particular type of attack. It's amazing how much expectations of generalised controls drive our ability to pick up and play a new game, isn't it? The demo starts and you have instant control from the very beginning, rather than being a cutscene where you just have to watch what the computer is doing. Not that it doesn't have cutscenes, but it doesn't use them overly much.
What is that server?
The developers stated that they wanted a flow betwixt hand-to-hand and ranged combat, a seamlessness to using a close combat weapon after shooting, and they've achieved this reasonably well, although I was surprised to find that the Space Marines aren't as shooty as I expected, with the hand-to-hand seeming to be more necessary rather than picking off Orks from a distance. The shooty Orks also seem to be far more of a threat than I was expecting. In terms of the tabletop game, Orks generally aren't shooty, being mostly melee based, whereas Space Marines are shooty and kill things with their ranged weaponry. After all, the bolter is a gun that fires rocket-propelled exploding bullets that detonate after they penetrate the skin. That's kind of their thing. In fact, it turns out gameplay-wise it plays a little bit like Dynasty Warriors. Even with the power attack you can string on the end of repeated normal attacks. There is a dodge and a sprint to get a little extra firepower in there before the enemy closes in too close. But with just shooting, it takes a very long time to drop the bigger Orks. Sprinting in power armor looks and feels exactly as clunky as you'd imagine. Actually, they've done a really great job in animating and modelling the Space Marines. There is always the risk when you're drawing something with such over-the-top proportions and vivid coloration as the Space Marines that they'll not work so well and end up looking silly and breaking the audience and players' suspension of disbelief. But it is simply not the case. The Space Marines look great. The other problem area is having the serious future humanity's greatest warriors against da Orks, who are comedically over the top and silly, yet again it all just fits nicely. Whilst the Space Marines themselves are the very colourful larger-than-life characters they should be, and the Orks are also the bright green they should be, the game does get a little muted and grey at times. I suspect the game doesn't really have a proper black colour, but this is generally a bad idea in games since it just makes them look murky when it's supposed to make everything always viewable and clear. They should not be afraid to use very dark shades. It all ends up looking better. Still, the game is extremely appealing graphically, though it is a shame we didn't get to see the Space Marines with their fearsome looking helms on. I'm sure we will in the full game though. The game has, unlike the first Dawn of War, and even the second one to a lesser extent, gotten the size difference right between the various Warhammer 40k universe characters. Space Marines are not Imperial Guard in wide suits. The Space Marines are far larger than the Guard, even without their power armour on. That's how it's supposed to be.
Yes, Lord Drogon.
There were a few graphical glitches in the demo, with character models occasionally twitching to a different stance or appearing briefly in the wrong place, but generally these glitches were few and far between. It's nice to have a futuristic fantasy shooter, which is not a contemporary one in thin disguise. The Halo games are a good example of what I mean. Early Halos were far more fantastic than later variations, which are much more identifiably contemporary. Even Killzone has easily recognisable modern elements. The ISA is one letter away from USA for good reason. What Warhammer 40k Space Marine brings, however, is something that is refreshingly divorced from the usual fare. We're talking about the battle between the fascistic human empire, complete with their immortal emperor, and their struggle against Orks, a race of green-skinned, partially fungal creations made for war, whose latent psychic ability turns their clearly non-functioning guns into deadly weaponry, and who just happen to have comedy Cockney accents. I mention this in every review or comment about THQ and Relics Warhammer stuff, but it bears repeating here. The voice acting is absolutely spot on, bringing Dem Orks to life. Competently used surround sound really helped place me in the world and tell me where my enemies were. And don't even get me started on the Forces of Chaos and the intricate role they play with every other race, well, except the Tau, and the Warhammer 40k universe. It's pretty out there, but because it's so established and has been through so many iterations, it comes across as, unintuitive as it may sound, strangely believable simply because it's so fleshed out and solid. And if you're someone who appreciates Games Workshop stuff, wonderfully familiar. In the game, whilst you only have the option of using the melee weapon you are currently carrying, you can swap guns at any point, even to two-handed variants, whilst strangely not inhibiting your ability to use the melee weapon in the exact same way. Don't worry about it, just go with it. The selection is Bolt Pistol, Bolter, Stalker Pattern Bolter, and the Vengeance Launcher. The Bolt Pistol has infinite ammo and is the backup weapon, whilst the others are the equivalent of Standard Rifle, Sniper Rifle, and Sticky Grenade Launcher. Close combat-wise, so far we've seen the brilliant Chainsword and Power Axe, and the help screen indicates there will also be the Standard Combat Knife and the rarer Thunder Hammer.
Identify yourself.
They aren't afeared to use lots of the background flavour and colour of the Warhammer 40k universe either. Skull probes and skull motif buttons are to be found in abundance. Orks travel the universe in hollowed out asteroids. Orchitecture, that's Ork architecture, is brilliantly designed, looking suitably constructed from scrap and hastily painted in clan colours. Level design is interesting, if perhaps a little flat at times, but has a great sense of scale, with some things in the game being suitably massive. There is always plenty of cover in the more open areas. In the smaller ones, you'll have to carefully watch all exits to succeed. For the main game, rather than using the Blood Ravens, developer Relics in-house Space Marine chapter, that's a unique Space Marine army with its own subset of rules and coloration, they have instead used the Ultramarine chapter. This seems odd, but on the other hand makes sense because they are one of the most easily identifiable Space Marine chapters, but unlike the others, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, the usual ones, their chapter is the most likely to use Stalker Pattern Bolters, so perhaps that's the reason. It is a great feeling to wade a bloody path through the Resistance, and this game is deliciously brutal, with blood everywhere. Although it's a shame the blood decals don't stay on the models longer, since it's actually quite cheap to do. Lovely kill sequences practically pour with blood, and it's ever so satisfying to stick a chainsaw down a big orc's throat. Gretchen, smaller, rantier orcoids, slowly morph into walking health packs as the game progresses. There are 3 optional layouts and a variety of extra options for control customization, such as swapping the sticks and inverting L1, R1 with L2 and R2. It's nice to see an option to turn the aiming assist off as well, but a slight shame it didn't just let us remap all the controls where we wanted. Weirdly, the controls for the Xbox 360 controller I was using on the PC were less customizable than the PlayStation version, which lets you swap the shoulder buttons, as I say. Whereas on the PC it just wouldn't let me. although I did anyway with the software, but that's not important. The Windows version didn't seem particularly stable, and I did have a few sound issues. But in conclusion, this game is so much fun, and I for one will be getting it as soon as it comes out. In fact, I've already pre-ordered it, and I recommend it wholeheartedly. There is also a new channel which features me talking about stuff which is a bit more frequent. So if this isn't enough, you can also subscribe to Corrosive Extras with the link in the description of this video. Thank you.